The big idea here is to not overcomplicate things. What we're going to do is just to talk about what each one of these letters means, and once we do the examples, you'll see how we're basically just plugging stuff into a formula and then solving for an unknown. So we talked about how compound interest works. It gives us an amount of money after a certain amount of time has passed. So this is the amount of money after some time, usually defined later on. As you might have suspected, this T over here, this T stands for time, usually in years when we're talking about interest. So everything else, this P stands for, it's called the principal, and it means the initial amount of money you put in. So if you're like depositing $500 in an account or borrowing $5,000, that's your value for P. R is going to be our interest rate as a decimal, meaning if they tell you, for example, that it's 5%, you want to write that as a decimal, 0.05. Maybe it's 2.87%. Then as a decimal, that's 0.0287. For those of you who have forgotten how to do that because you haven't seen it since like 5th grade, the idea is that wherever the decimal point is, you're going to kick it 2 spots to the left. So if there isn't a decimal point at all, you put one at the end of the problem and go 2 to the left, and then if there's extra slots, you put a 0. If there is a decimal point, still 2 slots, because we're basically dividing by 100. That's what percent means, right? It means per 100 or divide by 100. So that's going to be the R value. And then this N is the trickiest part. This N represents how often the interest will be applied, how often interest is compounded. And I don't want to get too into this because it's going to be a real snooze fest if I do, but I'll say like basically when banks or credit cards apply interest, they don't do it at the end of the year. Well, let's say they give you like a 12% interest rate, What they'll do is they'll apply the interest, what they'll say quarterly. So they'll say compounded quarterly. What that would tell us is that 4 times throughout the year, they're going to take a portion of that interest rate and they're going to apply it to the balance. So, a fourth of the way through the year, they'll take a fourth of this. So they'll take 3% and apply it. And then after another, quarter of the year, they'll apply another 3%. They'll take that 12% and they'll divide it by however often they're compounding it. So you can see that N shows up in 2 spots. It shows up here and it shows up here. And if you think about, you don't need to think about why this makes sense really, but if you want this formula to not look so crazy and intimidating, that makes perfect sense, because what we're going to want to have happen is at some point we're going to want to figure out what the interest rate was, how much was applied over the course of the entire loan. So we're going to want to take what was the interest rate, let's divide it by the number of times they applied it during a year, and then multiply it by the number of years times the number of times it was applied. You'll see it in the formulas, will make more sense. But at the end of the day, what I need you to know right now is this is the initial amount you're starting with, the principal. This is the interest rate as a decimal. This is how often the interest is applied, and we'll talk about what the actual values are as we go through the problems. This is the time in years, and this is how much money you'll have after all those years. In the next video, I'll talk about when we use this equation versus this equation, but that's enough for this right now.